everyone, welcome back to another episode of Stripped by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. My name is Steph Sia. I am the host of the show, and I am a stripper, and I will actually be on stage tonight when this is being recorded. Last time you could catch me at Shaker's Show Lounge in Surrey, and I am also a digital content creator, so I do have an OnlyFans, which is pretty active, and I'm also a former sugar baby. I started this podcast a couple years ago, and I am glad to say it is still going, and I still love doing it, so I'm going to keep on going for as long as I can. And every single week I bring on new guests, including today, which I'm really excited to announce in a couple seconds since I've done this whole spiel thing. I took a little bit of a break recording for the past month and a bit, so I am sorry if it doesn't appear if I can speak English in this one, if I'm mumbling or stumbling or fumbling over my words today, but bear with me. We have a very exciting guest who I happen to connect with randomly on Instagram, and this just seems to be the way that I seem to be connecting with guests nowadays. I had met Kit Rothschild from the Pace Society located here in Vancouver just on Instagram a couple weeks ago, and we connected, and I can't even remember what the whole conversation was, but I began to get interested in their work and what they did, and I was like, oh, Pace is such an amazing organization. It's been around forever, and I was like, what exactly do you do there? And it sounded really interesting, and we are going to get into it all. So, Kit, are you there?
I am.
Yay. I'm so happy to have connected with you, and so recently as well. So thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule to chat with me today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're so welcome. So excited to bring you onto the show. Kit is the violence prevention coordinator at the Pace Society, and I am excited to hear about everything that you know about Pace, your own journey with sex work, what work you're doing with the organization, and we're just gonna have a fun little chat over the next hour or so, and I cannot wait to just learn more about you. And I feel like I only just know you from our really small interactions that were on Instagram, and also this brief chat before we hit record. So
well, yeah, let me unveil myself, I guess, as it were. Thank you so much for having me. I'm stoked to be here, and it was really cool to connect with you on Instagram. Yes. What we connected about was sex workers unionizing and the model that the Lusty Lady had, and how stoked I have been about that, as a person. So
there we go.
To have listened to that episode and to be here now. So thanks so much.
You are so welcome.
I guess I'll start with how I got into sex work and the work that I did, and then stop talking about me as quickly as I can. I got into sex work when I was 21, living in Montreal. I started having really bad chronic pain and couldn't get a diagnosis and couldn't really do regular work.
Right.
So I started camming when I first started, and I actually hated it. It was just so not for me. I don't know.
I had the same experience.
And then a few months later, I had gotten a diagnosis and was on meds and still couldn't keep a regular job.
Okay.
I was looking in the paper and saw this ad that was dungeon hiring mistresses, steady clients. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I could do that. And my boyfriend at the time was like, oh, no, you would be great at that. So I was like, wow. Okay, well, give her a call. So I called this lady, and she's kind of a character, for sure.
Yes.
Who ran the oldest dungeon in Quebec.
Okay.
And my interview with her was kind of ridiculous. She was like, what will you do, what won't you do? And I'd kind of always been into kink, so I was just like, well, I think these are some limits that I have, and I'm not sure about the rest. Mm-hmm. And she was like, yeah, that's fine, that's cool, okay, what do you want your name to be? And I was like, I kind of don't know. So pick something, quickly as, off the top of my head kind of thing.
Oh my gosh.
And she was like, okay, well, there's a client coming in 10 minutes. If he doesn't complain, you got the job.
What?
So I was like,
Oh my god.
oh, okay. So she like gave me like a little PVC outfit to put on and put me in the room with this client.
Oh
And he
wow.
was luckily hilarious. He wanted to like do some role play where he was Snow White and I was the evil queen who had like kidnapped him because I wanted to be the fairest of them all. Whatever. Anyway,
Oh my
I had a
gosh,
great time with
amazing.
it. I was like cackling the whole time. He had a great time. I got the job. I
Yay.
worked there for a couple of years and I adored it.
So
Um,
cool.
like I don't know if I've ever had a job since that was like it just was a role that I could create really easily in my life. I had like a lot of characters to model myself after. And the
Yeah.
people that I was working with in the dungeon were fabulous and they taught me so much and yeah, it was great.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it was
So
also
cool.
like a fabulous way to pay my rent and pay for all my meds, which weren't covered and were
Mm.
usually 2 or 3 times my rent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I
Wow.
did that full time for 5 years until I decided that I was kind of tired of people calling me up while I was in line at the grocery asking me what I would and wouldn't do. And so I was like, I should just go back to school and do something that is like steady. So I went back to school
Mm-hmm.
for nursing.
Okay. Whoa. Wow.
And then
180.
there's oddly like so many crossover skills between doming and nursing, like
Oh,
basically the
do
same
tell.
job.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Like both in terms of like soft skills, like emotional labor, and also like technical stuff like medical play or whatever. Like there's so much crossover.
Wow.
Um,
I love that.
so that was cool, but I wound up getting injured, and that gave me another kind of chronic pain.
Oh
And so
no.
after about 4 years of nursing, I was getting back into doming because I just couldn't do a regular job anymore.
Yeah.
And at that point, I started looking for jobs in other cities, and I found the
Mm-hmm.
job at Pace, which at the time they were hiring for the transition support worker,
Okay.
which was kind of a complicated little situation. It was like a project that came out of money that the Harper government set aside for exiting, but
Oh.
that's not really part of Pace's ethos, and so we just
Right.
ran it as a support project
Right. Wow.
and offered people the support they wanted. But so I came out to Montreal for that job and
Okay.
did that for 2.5 years, 3 years, I guess.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then last March transitioned into the position of the safety coordinator, but because of COVID, wound up still like doing some support for quite a while and doing
Mm-hmm.
some other stuff as well. But yeah, so that's the sort of like story arc of how I wound up at Pace. But
Incredible.
yeah, I don't know if you have like specific questions about the work I was doing.
I have so many questions. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's just like, this just keeps getting better and better. First of all, I love how they had that ad in the paper. Like,
Yeah, it was brilliant.
yeah, I'm like, oh my god. Like, you just don't know, never like hear anything about that like anymore. Like, I mean, I would assume that was probably in one of the classified sections, possibly, or
Yeah. Yeah, like
yeah,
a classified section in what the equivalent of this Georgia Strait would be
right,
or would have been. It doesn't exist anymore, but
yeah.
um
Oh my gosh.
yeah. I miss the personal sections sometimes.
I
They were great.
know. I mean, I used to love like being as like a young child and just like reading through the classified section, like, oh, what does this mean? And like
Yeah,
the overall curiosity that brought, and like, I yeah, it seems like a lifetime ago that those were still in existence, which is really
totally.
really really sad to say. But I mean. It's such a cool story that you shared though about how you got into sex work, because that's so non-conventional in like today's lens.
Yeah. And like certainly for like folks in the kink community, a lot of people think there should be like a formal entry where you're trained by someone
Hmm.
and all of this and like I'm
Yeah.
glad that I had enough like personal kink history that I didn't
Yes.
need tons of training and that the people that I was working with were like willing to share skills with me and teach me things because that
Totally.
sometimes I think is lacking in the
Mm-hmm.
community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Where it's
definitely.
like
Like,
people get viewed as competition and then nobody wants to share skills.
yeah, and I feel that's like a thing, not just reserved for the kink community, but sometimes I feel like that goes within just a sex worker community in general, the whole
Totally.
competition aspect of things. But I mean, I'm glad that you had some great people there, your colleagues, to help you. But I mean, going back to what you said just now, too, some people in the kink community might, there should be some kind of training and stuff prior to working in this type of field. Is that something that you believe in now, or what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think so many people experiment with kink in ways that maybe, like, the formal kink community might be like, okay, that's not perfect, but, like, you're trying.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as people are thinking about consent in those situations, and that's where the, like, heaviest weight of the experience is, that's great.
Yeah.
If they're having experiences where consent is not the, like, pivotal issue, then I would hope that they would get some training where it was.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I want to hear more a little bit about that first experience and just like what was going on, if you can remember, what was going on in your head when the headmistress was like, oh, by the way, yeah, your first client's coming in 10 minutes. Like,
I mean, I kind of thought she was drunk. And, like, in retrospect, that wasn't a wrong assumption, but I really just was like, wait, what? I thought you would, like, call me in a week and be like, okay, now somebody wants to see you. I didn't think this was happening now.
Yeah.
Which was like, no, when I said steady clients, I meant it. So I was like, okay. And so it was really, I mean, I think I kind of lucked out that he was my first, like, pro session because he was so much fun. And I saw him a couple of times afterwards and always just had, like, an absolute blast with him.
A good time, yeah, for sure. That's
like,
awesome.
I used to be kind of a drama geek, and I love acting.
Yeah, well.
And a lot of domination and a lot of sex work in general is all how good of an actress you are, or how good of an actor you are.
100%. And so many, as you said, like, so many different forms of sex work is acting. It's a role that we're playing. It's a fantasy that we're, playing up a little bit. So, I mean, if you were, if you majored in drama or theater or something like that, like, I feel like you would be excellent in this kind of situation. So
yeah.
That's really cool. So you ended up doming for 5 years as well. So I know that you also mentioned you also did a bit of camming, which I also did last year and I hated it as well. It just wasn't.
I'm not the only one.
Yeah, no, you're not the only one. Like, it's just something that, like, certain people can get, and it's your forte, and I'm just like, I feel like this is not for me.
There was something about camming that made me feel very objectified, whereas when I was doming and I was in the room, I felt like I had all the power.
Yeah.
And whether or not they were objectifying me, it was still a role I was more comfortable playing.
Yeah, I also share a similar sentiment in that as well. Like, when I was camming, it was like, okay, I just felt like people were picking things off a menu, and, like, the menu was really cheap for me, in my opinion. And,
and limited. It's a small menu.
It is, and it's just like, okay, I just felt like a monkey. People are just instructing a monkey, like, do this trick and do this. Now play with your pussy and do that. And I'm just like...
Yeah, totally. Show boobs.
Yeah. Show me your titty. And I just, for me, like, it just seems very mechanical and not natural in any way. Like, I couldn't find any way for me to, like, really play in that kind of atmosphere. So...
Totally.
Yeah, which is not okay for me. But...
It's not as fun.
No, it's not as fun. I mean, and with doming, I feel I haven't done much doming as well, because for me, it's not really my thing either. But I feel like what was I asking? What was I going to ask for? I forgot where I was going with that. But my question was going to be, I just totally got derailed. My question was, did you also dabble in other forms of sex work while you were doming, or was it you were just completely focused on...
Totally focused.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Was the only thing I did. And, like, because of the nature of my chronic pain, like, I had vulvodynia. I still have it, but it's way less severe now.
Oh, okay.
So it's, like, chronic pain of the vagina and vulva. So, like, most sex in my personal life wasn't happening. But being able to be sexual in a sadomasochistic kind of way was great.
Yeah.
It, was still allowing me to have a fulfilling sex life, even though I wasn't having any sex. And cool. Other forms of sex work just seemed like they weren't really options because I just wasn't able to have sex.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of would eliminate those other forms because it just wouldn't be enjoyable, and it would be
Yeah, or
painful for
some of
you.
them anyways. Like, I'm
Yeah.
sure I could still strip or something, but I'm a terrible dancer. So that would probably be awful. Or like I could probably do phone stuff, but
Yeah.
that would, yeah, I would just laugh a lot.
I can just picture that
Which
now.
is sometimes okay and sometimes not. But
Yeah, there's a time and a place where it's
exactly.
appropriate. Um,
Yeah.
with
When they're paying you to laugh at them.
yes, exactly. But in the humiliation kind of aspect, I can totally see that happening.
Totally, yeah.
Because you have an extensive amount of experience in doming, how did you ever see, or did your way of doming change at all from, say, that day one where you had that first client to further down the line, like when you were
Totally.
possibly exiting? Yeah, did you want
It
to elaborate about
changed
that?
so much. I think at first I was like, even in my own personal life, I wasn't very good at setting boundaries. And I wasn't very good at
Mm,
sticking to those boundaries.
right.
And within a few months of working in the dungeon, I was great at boundaries. Like really solid at it. And also like probably within the first year, figured out the things that I was comfortable with and really into and the things that I really didn't want to do. So
Right.
like when I started, I was doing golden showers, and after a while I realized I was really just not into that, just not my
Yeah.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so some of the way that I worked shifted, and I think as my confidence grew, I got stricter and stricter as a Tom. I was just
Oh
like
my gosh.
not willing to tolerate any shit whatsoever.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love hearing about people's evolution within sex work and how much things change
Yeah.
and you change and like your work changes and your boundaries change too. So it's really
Yeah.
really
And it
cool to
like
hear that.
it has a ripple effect. Like the confidence that I gained doming helped me
Yeah.
deal with more stuff in my personal life, helped me like deal with confronting stigma when I was dealing with it, like so much stuff. I would be, I think, a vastly different person if I had not started doing that when I did.
Yeah, and I love that you brought that up too because sometimes I feel like people don't really recognize that part of sex work and how healing, but also like how it can really build on those skills that are not maybe you're not maybe exposed to every day.
Yeah,
So,
totally. And like this was a big part of what I was doing as like the support worker when I was doing transition stuff, was like
mm,
helping people pick out all of the different skills, whether that's like emotional labor or like running your own business, time management, marketing,
mm-hmm.
whatever, to like make a CV and go apply for a regular job. Because I
Yeah.
think a lot of people don't contextualize what they're doing for sex work as being applicable in other job markets, but it
Yes.
absolutely is.
Yeah, I mean, why don't we transition into, yeah, like your work with Pace and like how you
Yeah.
started off as a support worker, and like I love that last note that you just made there too. Like there's so many transferable skills that you can bring
Totally.
on into a vanilla job, or if you're transitioning, or if you're trying to start your own business. There's so much. Like
Yeah,
we are
absolutely.
running our own business essentially,
Yep.
right?
Sometimes multiple businesses.
Yes, all the
And
side
like multiple
hustles.
streams of income and managing all of that and filing your
Mm-hmm.
taxes. Like all of these skills are so important.
Yeah, and
Um, but yeah, Pace. I'll dive in there a little bit. So Pace
yeah,
has been around since 1994 and was started by a group of sex workers and some allies, friends of theirs, in like a one-bedroom apartment on Hastings.
yeah,
Pace is a peer-led by within four sex workers' rights and advocacy organization, support organization. And we've been in the downtown east side for 27 or 28 years. My math is terrible. Since 1994. We have a very like harm reduction approach. Everything is peer led. We try and like survey our members as frequently as possible to get their feedback on different programs and different things that we're doing. And yeah, we've been a space for current and former sex workers of all genders for a long time now. I could not get a specific date, but a pretty long time. Um, and we have like during COVID, we started a food delivery program in
yes.
place of like sit down meals. We have a weekly supper club, which is on Zoom right now
So
for our
cool.
trans members, which used to be like a pretty lively in person dinner, and I think we'll go back to that quite soon.
Fun.
Which is great.
Yeah.
And then sort of besides the other stuff that I do, we also have an Indigenous sharing circle on Wednesdays. 2 counselors available. We just hired another counselor. It's really exciting.
Awesome.
We have a support worker who is just a powerhouse and is totally brilliant. A team of peer health navigators, and then a couple of people working in like advocacy and like management, running the organization and whatnot. It has been an all gender space, I think, for the last decade, but I couldn't get somebody to confirm what year it had become an all gender space.
Okay.
But for quite some time now.
I didn't know that. That's really cool. It's super inclusive.
Yeah, we
Awesome.
try our fucking best.
Yes.
We really do. Like, no, I don't think any organization or business or anything is perfect, because everywhere is just a microcosm for the fucked up systems that we live in.
Yeah.
But PACE is always really trying.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
Totally.
And so they kind of came onto my radar in 2005. There was this sex workers forum in Montreal that was like, people from all over the world came, and it was just
cool.
mind-blowingly cool.
Yeah.
I had never realized before that like you could do sex work as activism.
Yeah.
And so they were kind of on my radar then, and then more on my radar when they were doing all the stuff with Bedford, because they did a lot sort of to support the challenge that Terry Bedford brought, and
huge case.
Sherry Kisselback, who for a long time was all of PACE, had also like challenged the standing law.
Okay.
So they did a lot around then, and I was just like, oh, what a great organization. And I was, at the time, doing some work on the board of Stella, which is a similar organization in Montreal.
In Montreal, right, yeah. I follow them on Twitter. Cool.
Yeah, they're great. Stella's wonderful.
Yeah.
And so when I applied for the job and got it, I was like, well, this is such a dream job. Like, obviously I'll move across the country to work for this organization. They're fabulous.
Yeah.
And so it was pretty fabulous, like, I won't lie. It's been kind of a dream job since day one, despite some of the, like, I don't know, funding restrictions or, like, just the limitations of what you can do when you're working in a nonprofit trying to support people who are, like, really living on the margins and really need, like, a lot more support than we'll ever be able to give. It's essentially, like, in terms of people needing housing or people needing safe doctors, like, we're never going to be able to get all of the people housing who need it, unfortunately. But yeah, it's essentially been a dream job. What can I tell you about PACE?
So much.
Maybe I should start with Sherry a little bit.
Yeah, of course. Tell me about this wonderful Sherry. She sounds wonderful.
Yeah, Sherry's so fabulous. Sherry Kisselback was the violence prevention coordinator for 18 years before me.
Okay.
There was a couple of people in the position in the interim, but had a little like hard time keeping that staffed, so I wound up taking it over. And Sherry, for years, had built and rebuilt this workshop, and it was like a series of, I think initially it was 12 workshops. So people would come for 6 weeks for Mondays and Tuesdays and get lunch and get like a $5 or $10 stipend, and then talk about how to prevent violence, how to work safely outside, and how to like kind of spot if somebody is about to attack you, what to do if somebody attacks you.
Oh, wow.
And like included some physical self-defense that at the time was being provided by a couple of police officers who had volunteered.
Cool.
To like teach folks some judo moves. And Sherry's like just a masterwork of a human being. I adore her. She worked all over the United States, Canada, in Japan, and stripping, and worked street level and indoor sort of interchangeably. She's got like 1,000,001 stories, and she looks like the sweetest grandma next door, and you would never suspect that she's like just got the dirtiest mind and like a lifetime of like wild stories to share. And so she brought like a wealth of really important experience.
Okay.
And like just was an incredibly well-respected community member for as long as she was working there. there were periods where Pace didn't have a whole lot of funding, and so it would just be Sherry running her program. For a long time, we were operating out of a building that we were squatting on Cordova.
Oh my gosh.
I think we were squatting in that building for like 6 years.
Oh my gosh.
And so there's been times where like Sherry and her work has really been like the mainstay of Pace.
Okay. Yeah.
And so her retiring, and she kind of retired progressively. And then when COVID hit, was like, well, I hate doing stuff online, and I'm not going to start doing stuff on Zoom, so I'm just going to retire. Which now that COVID is quote unquote, according to the government, over.
Yes.
I'm hoping maybe we can tease her out of retirement to come back a little bit.
Right.
She's just so wonderful, and like we need the voices of elders in our community.
Yes, we do. Absolutely. And she sounds wonderful. I want to get her on the show. You've like totally sold this woman.
Yeah, honestly, I'm sure I could connect you. I'm sure she'd be willing. And okay. I'd be happy to like go bring my computer over to her house and set it up so that she can use this. Because she'll be able to talk about how they challenged the standing law more eloquently than I can, I think. But essentially what that was all about was that she attempted with SWAV, the Sex Workers United Against Violence group, to challenge the sex work laws. And she was told that because she didn't have any charges pending and because she wasn't an active worker, she didn't have any right to challenge the laws.
Really?
So Pivot took this up, and Pivot and Sherry and SWAV took it to the Supreme Court, and she won.
Wow.
In saying that, like, even though she's no longer working, she's able to challenge this.
Yeah, for sure.
But at that point, Bedford had already started.
Right. And that was...
So it was like these kind of overlapping things, but it really, like, it changed how marginalized people can speak up against laws.
Yeah.
So it was like, it was quite monumental as a thing in and of itself.
Absolutely. Giving marginalized groups a voice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And being able to say, like, you can, like, I don't know, maybe have time and space away from that thing and then be able to still advocate and not be discluded because you're no longer that marginalized.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes a great point for sure. So she created a legacy, it sounds like.
She really did. And she has educated, like, now 2 generations of sex workers.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
it's incredible.
When I was sort of looking at the occupational health and safety workshop that she was running, she was like, how would you modernize this? How would you, like, bring it up to date?
Yeah.
And I was like, A, I would stop using paper copies because trees. B, I would talk about folks who are working online or indoor a little bit because at that time it wasn't included.
Okay, yeah, that's a huge thing now for sure.
So, Canadian estimates at this point, the last thing I read that seemed accurate, said that about 20% of the sex work is happening outdoors and about 80% is happening online or inside. So we wanted to sort of like update the workshop to include stuff for people who are working online or inside, because if we're not covering like 80% of the people who are working, then we're not reaching enough of the population.
Yeah, and it's not going to be representative as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
And like, in terms of our membership, that's a really good question. I don't know if we've ever polled membership about where people, like what the location of people's work is. I would hazard a guess that the folks who come and access our services in person are probably more folks who work outdoors, and the folks who are accessing like resources that we have listed online or whatever, or like counseling, might be folks who are working indoors. But there's still like a pretty healthy mix in the population of our members of like where people are working or what kind of work they're doing.
Right.
I think it's 82% of our members identify as women.
Okay.
We've got, I think, 12 to 14% who are trans and a pretty small percentage who identify as men.
Right.
And the other sort of like overarching demographics in our membership are like about 52% of our members are Indigenous, which kind of stacks up with the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in sex work like across Turtle Island. And I would hazard a rough estimate that probably 70 to 80% of our members have a disability of one kind or another.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
These
I
are
think
really
there's a
interesting
huge
stats.
overrepresentation of people with disabilities in sex work, and it doesn't get talked about too much.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, disability in general, I feel like gets overlooked a lot
Yeah,
in lots of conversations, not just sex work, but in general. And it's something that definitely needs to be talked about. We need to also account for those people as well.
totally.
They matter. So
Absolutely.
these are really, really, really interesting and eye-opening stats that you shared. And I know they're just estimates, but I think it's really, really insightful for you to include that in this conversation.
Oh, yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah.
One thing that I guess I would point out, just to illustrate like just how overrepresented Indigenous people are in sex work, it's like Indigenous people on average are like 3 to 4% of the Canadian population. But they make
Yeah.
up something like 70% of the people in foster care,
Yep.
60% of people in jails, at least in our membership, 52% of the people doing sex work. So
Wow.
the damage and continued harm that colonization has done and is doing
Yes.
is so evident in sex work.
Yeah, absolutely. And the damage, I mean, that residential schools and like how systemic that damage is going over and over generations
Yeah, absolutely.
is astounding to me. And that's a whole other conversation too. But
It is, yeah.
but also
And also
important to
probably
note.
like not my area of expertise necessarily.
Nor
But
is it mine, but yeah, these are great information to have. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
yeah.
yeah, it's just incredible, like the work that PACE offers. And I want to hear a little bit more about the work that you do specifically too, in terms of like your title, because now you have moved over and you've kind of taken over as Sherry in terms of modernizing the program, basically. So
Yeah, and like
yeah.
I had created a bunch of like PowerPoints,
Hmm.
I guess about 2 years ago, and just kind of handed them to the next person who was in that position
Yeah.
and said like, here you go, run with it. They made some edits, the next person made some edits, and then it wound up back in my lap, and I was
Oh my
like, okay, well
gosh.
this is still like pretty good. I'm better at making PowerPoints now, so I can like edit and make things prettier.
Yes.
But so there has been like input from other staff in this, and it's all still like very heavily based on Sherry's material. But so there's an OHS program. I'm not sure what it's going to look like because we're just starting to come back after COVID. Our drop-in space has been closed and we haven't been running groups in person.
Right.
So it's kind of up in the air what it's going to look like right now. It might continue being online for people who want to access it online, and also
Okay.
being in person for folks who want to come in person.
Yeah, like what did it look like before the
Right.
pandemic?
Okay. So before COVID, it was like Mondays and Tuesdays. People would come for lunch.
Mm-hmm.
We would talk about stuff for about an hour and a half. They'd get a $10 stipend,
Mm-hmm.
which, like, money wise isn't great, but we solidly believe in giving people cash and we don't alter that. So,
Yeah.
and then it would run for 8 weeks.
Okay.
And there'd be like 16 workshops, and pre-COVID we had a couple of like jujitsu instructors come in to
So
like
cool.
teach people some self-defense moves at the end of the workshop.
Yeah.
And we moved away from police because most people don't feel comfortable in a room with police.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of people don't
So
trust them either.
asking them to like wrestle a cop isn't really safe.
Yeah, definitely not.
So people were super into that and it was great. And then COVID kind of just shut everything down. And so I was like scrambling about like how to get information out to people.
Yeah.
And so I started recording webinars about like what do emergency powers mean for doing sex work,
Mm-hmm.
how to stay safe in terms of doing sex work and harm reduction
Yeah.
during COVID-19.
Oh yeah.
With like guest speakers and whatever. Did a workshop about how to work online, because at the beginning of the pandemic there were so many people who hadn't worked online, who were trying to figure out how to create an OnlyFans, how to
Totally.
create online advertisements, whatever, all that stuff.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
technically that's not really information we're supposed to give people.
Oh.
because of procuring laws and because of how vaguely worded the laws are.
Right. Another gray area, right?
Yeah, it was like one of the many doors that the pandemic opened was being able to just like give people that information as to how they could start doing the work safely.
Right.
Because there were so many people who were just like in absolute dire financial straits.
Yeah, yeah. It was not a fun time. Not a fun time.
Yeah.
Still isn't a fun time.
It was truly awful, yeah. And it's still really hard on people,
Yeah.
economically speaking. And I think also for a lot of folks who are immunosuppressed physically, also really difficult.
For sure.
During the pandemic, aside from making like an info booklet and doing webinars, I was like part of a committee that was supporting an emergency relief fund that we were running for several months, I guess.
Yeah, I saw that online. Can you tell us a bit about the Sex Worker Relief Fund?
Yeah, we
So
got
awesome.
some emergency grants from the city to create like any kind of support for sex workers during COVID, and the thing that people needed was cash, obviously.
Yes.
So, depending on how big each grant was that we got, we're able to give micro grants of like 125 to $200, depending on people's need.
Yeah.
That was kind of hard to assess.
Yeah.
Because everybody is like in pretty high need.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
it was some hard work. I'm not gonna lie.
No kidding.
But it was so rewarding because we got, I can't remember how many people, but we put $150,000 into the hands of individuals.
Oh wow, that's awesome.
And so that was really gratifying.
Yeah.
And people were like really grateful and happy that we could help. And
yeah.
it was something that I wish we could just do permanently, but there's just not funding for it. We refused almost no one. We literally kind of only said no to people who disclosed within the application that they had other sources of income.
I see.
That were like steady incoming, whatever.
Yeah. Okay. This is really, really interesting.
But it was so much work. It was like just an enormous amount of work.
I bet.
And so when the like grants petered out, we were like, okay, that's all right. And then the other thing that we like started doing during COVID that we're still doing now is like food deliveries for folks who used to attend our groups most often, because we had like a variety of groups and like a bunch of people who were just like every day in our drop-in space coming to groups or just hanging out. And so we knew that those were the folks who were like most at risk for isolation and marginalization in the pandemic.
Right. That's really cool.
So those were the first people on our list to get food out to.
Amazing initiatives. These are just all so incredible, and I had no idea. Even I knew about the Sex Work Relief Fund, but I didn't know about the food delivery thing, which, that's such an apparent need during COVID too, because some people just can't go to stores. Some people are just like super high risk. Like there's so many factors there too.
And costs have just skyrocketed.
They have.
And, like, wages haven't.
Yep. Yeah.
Like most people aren't able to
disparity.
charge more now than they were 6 months ago. Although I think a lot of people bumped their prices at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think so.
So that they could see less people less often. But for a lot of people, they just didn't have the luxury, and so they just kind of had to keep working. And that's part of why I would love for a future for sex workers to look like unionization.
Yeah.
Because I think people need sick days, and they need to retirement.
Absolutely.
Like, they need retirement funds, and they need, like, the support that other workers get.
Yeah.
And the government's not giving sex workers, so...
Totally. Like, why don't we transition to that? In terms of like what do you think the future programs can look like, future iterations of this program can look like, what you believe in would be best. So I'd love to hear about this.
So I'm just starting to put out flyers this week for the like upcoming iteration of what OHS is going to look like, and I really want people's feedback.
Sure.
So I haven't decided how much the stipend will be yet, because I think we're going to do it less often so that we can offer people more money for it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And depending on how many people sign up, might just do it like a drop-in. where I'm
Okay.
doing it in person and also on Zoom at the same time, and people can log in on Zoom and watch.
Okay, cool. It's good to have options.
So it will be a little bit different, but I'm really excited to like be in a room with people again.
Yes, real people, not just floating heads.
Yeah, and like so much of the programs that we have at Pace have been centered around food since we started because you can't learn anything on an empty stomach. You just like you
No,
can't.
you'll just
And
fade.
like yeah, nobody's doing great if they haven't eaten.
Yeah,
So I'm like so excited to be in a room with people where we can like share food again
so
and like
awesome.
it's just really cool. I'm
Very
stoked about it.
cool.
So I think it will look like probably Tuesdays, maybe twice a month, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe every week, depending on
Wow.
like how many people are interested and what that looks like.
Yeah.
And because I've created like more webinars during the pandemic, I have more workshops.
Yeah, you
So
have
it
more
could technically
material.
be like 10 weeks long
Wow.
and meet twice a week or do it twice a year kind of thing and or three
Okay.
times a year, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it's kind of all up in the air, but there's a crap ton of material.
Totally. Yeah. So you have a lot of content there. You have a lot of stuff that you can work with that you can kind of draw
Absolutely.
out. So that's awesome. Like, and I know like with the restrictions being lifted here in Vancouver, I mean, slowly. I mean, it's a really interesting situation to be in my opinion. But I want to comment on that right now. But when do you expect to start these in person sessions? Is this going to be something that's pretty immediate, like immediately
I'm
available,
gonna,
or
I'm gonna guess in August.
yeah, yeah.
Because it'll take a little while to see who wants to come and how many people, and then
Mm-hmm.
depending on how many people sign up, looking at whether or not we can do it in pace. Because if it's only a few people, I think we can safely have everybody in our space.
Right.
But if it's more people than we're allowed to have according to the infectious disease people or whatever, then I
Mm-hmm.
think we're going to do it at 312 Main.
Okay. Yeah. Just
I
around the
don't know if
corner.
you're familiar with that space or not, but it used to be a
No.
police station and now is like a co-working and
Oh.
community space,
Oh, okay.
which is like kind of rad.
That
But
is really cool. I didn't know about that.
yeah,
Is that
I'm trying to think.
like where? Like,
It's right at 312 Main. It's like Main and Hastings.
yeah, I was gonna say, I'm like, that's near the number 5 Orange, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like
Yeah.
across the street and up the block, just a ways.
I didn't know that that space was available. That's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Awesome.
super cool and it's beautiful inside, and they've done a lot to sort of like I guess I want to say cleanse it if it's former energy.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Because
and so that's cool.
that was a former police building.
Yeah,
Like right across from like the police museum and like down the street from Fire Hall.
yeah,
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 yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Wow, really cool.
yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And then like okay, so the OHS stuff is one chunk of what I'm doing, and then the other stuff that I'm doing is like public education. So
Okay.
I count this as my work. And that involves sometimes like educating doctors in clinics or private clinicians or therapists or whoever wants the training, really.
Yeah.
And then I'm working on a couple of long-term projects. And the
Okay.
long-term projects are like one is looking at creating a indoor co-working space for people that would be like co-op run.
Yeah.
Because I think that like there's still a lot of people who do car dates, and that is not the safest.
No.
And a lot of folks who live in the downtown east side don't always want to bring dates back to their rooms.
Right.
So having somewhere that people could work out of and share, I think would be really beneficial and like help people stay safer while they're working.
Yeah,
So
for
that's
sure.
like a long-term project. And then the other long-term project is working on safety alternatives that aren't the police.
Yeah, because there's just a lot of mistrust right now. Not even just right now, but I mean, historically speaking,
Yeah, like I
right?
think at least since I mean things have shifted over the years. Like previous generations of sex workers and sex workers were like really trying to work with police and train them to be better and not to treat people the way they treated a
Treat
lot of
people.
like victims,
Yeah.
family victims, that kind of stuff, because they they showed beyond a shadow of a doubt that they had zero respect for sex workers.
Yeah.
And trying to get them to come to the table has been really difficult. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Living in Community organization.
No.
So Living in Community is an org, and their whole ethos has been to help businesses and police work more safely with sex workers, and how to create communities where those can all be really seamless things.
Right.
They've come out in the last year saying that the police don't interact with them as they should, and so they are no longer welcome to be a part of Living in Community. And I think that is a sentiment that is shared quite a bit. And certainly at Pace, we're I've been doing a lot of work with the defunct 604 network this last year to really work on taking away the police budget and turning that into grassroots safety initiatives from communities.
Great. Wow.
So that's the long-term picture stuff.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, you are doing so much.
Thanks.
So much good work. I was like, okay, and they're like, actually, and I have more work as well, and I'm doing these projects. What? It just sounds like so much already in your role as a violence prevention coordinator, and I was like, okay, and you're doing other projects on top of that, and I think it's just so incredible, and just shows how much you care about sex workers, and I think that is just so wonderful. We need more people like you out here.
Thank you. That is really kind. I appreciate that.
It's just incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all this, and it really just brings and sheds light to what is needed out there, to support our sex workers. And I'm so glad that we were able to have this conversation and discussion, because we're discussing topics that are not always discussed or are at the table. So I think it really does make a difference, and I cannot wait to hear more about your progress with the projects that you're working on. So it's all so exciting.
Well, I will come back and chat anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. But there's still questions, so
yes, please, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel like this is a big question, and it's one of the questions that came in from the audience. But the question is, and it's a really broad question as well, so feel free to answer how you would like. But this person wrote in, how can we help our street-based sex workers? So.
Okay, so I think a big one is supporting orgs that are supporting folks to work on the street. So Wish, Pace, Suave. And I think also recognizing that there's sometimes a fair amount of crossover with people working indoors and outdoors.
Yeah, there is.
And I think one of the biggest things is not buying into the hierarchy. You're not any better of a person or any better of a worker because you work inside or charge more money. It is the same work. It's the same emotional and physical labor. It's just class stratification that sort of divides us, and it shouldn't be there. So I think one of the huge ways that anybody, supporters of your show, can support folks who work outside is really just to tear down the notion that there's any difference between the two.
Absolutely. I feel like sometimes we forget about our street-based sex workers and our survival sex workers. And as you mentioned, it's the same work.
Yeah.
It's so much emotional labor there that we as sex workers have to go through.
And even sometimes just the menial tasks involved with doing that, making sure you've got condoms, making sure you've got lube, making sure your house is clean, making sure the person has towels, making sure they actually shower.
100%.
So much work. And, that is shared across the board.
Yeah, I feel like the hierarchy, and this is going to be in an upcoming episode with a person that you might know, I feel, if you've worked at Pace for a while, but I'll tell you after we record who it might be, because that'll be the following week's episode. But just speaking to the hierarchy and how damaging that can be. Not just for people that aren't sex workers, but like within our community, adopting that kind of mindset is so damaging.
It really is. It's like we are a community that's like pretty marginalized already. And the lateral violence within the community is sometimes so vicious. And it's like, this is why we aren't organized, and this is why we don't have a union, and this is why we don't have workers' rights yet, is because there's so much like infighting, and there's so much like, well, oh, but I'm doing different work, and so I'm not that.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're all trying to survive under capitalism.
Yes.
So, even the term survival sex work is like, you can apply that to people who are feeling like they have to do the work to pay for their education. Just like you could say somebody's doing the work to pay for their food.
Right.
Really, like, survival is really in the eye of the beholder sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. For sure.
Yeah.
Going back to something you said too with, labor rights. These are just basic labor rights that we should all have and be granted. And this is my question. This is just a random question that I thought of right now. But what are your thoughts on, because I know that there still is kind of a divide for those who don't want to organize. I know I know sex workers that they want to keep their independent contractor type status, but then when you really break it down, it's not really an independent contractor.
Benefit, except that they don't have to pay union dues.
Yeah. Like, what do you have to say to that?
I mean, I don't know. Part of me is like, again, there's a huge amount of privilege that's acting there. Where it's like, somebody's like, well, I'm earning enough money, or I'm earning tons of money. I don't need to worry about needing to take sick days.
Yeah.
However, there's tons of people in our community that can't take a sick day and are working sick.
Yeah.
And I wish that there was a fund available for those people to take a day off. And so, like, being able to, like, work towards that and trying to build it into the idea that our community is not just people who are poor or not just people who are rich, and that we need to be supporting each other regardless of how much money we make is, like, I think a big part of where the, like, future of sex work organizing needs to be going.
Yeah, I feel like, personally, we should just all be on the same page. And you brought up a good point there, too. Like, there is definitely a good amount of privilege in that kind of conversation for those who are making bank. But not everyone is even on that playing field.
Right? So, like, I'm kind of an anti-capitalist. I really advocate for, like, rich people just giving their money away.
Yes.
And so I'm, like, maybe not the best person to ask about it. Because I'm whatever, I'll give my income away. I'm never going to be able to own a house. I'm not that worried about it. Whereas I think some people really get into the mindset of, like, and this is also survival of, like, well, I don't know if I'm going to have a client next week, so I can't give any of my money away, and I have to keep it all.
Totally.
And it's like, yeah, it's feast or famine always in this business.
Yes.
It's always like that. And so I think there just needs to be, like, more solidarity with people, regardless of whether they're doing direct or indirect work or how much money they're able to charge.
Definitely. 100%. I guess my last question for, the organization is, how can we support PACE specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always, now that we're going to be reopening, we're looking for volunteers to help us do all sorts of stuff. And I think, like, as we reopen in the next, I think it'll probably be another month before the last person in our office is double vaccinated, and we can, like, really open our drop-in space.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, and even before, like, a lot of our volunteers are indoor workers, or people who have, like a lot more privilege, let's say, than some of our other members.
Yeah.
And so many individual workers donated to the emergency fund. And so, like, I think people are thinking about mutual aid and are supporting each other in lots of ways. And I'm sure there's also, like, friends who are supporting each other in in like monetary and also emotional ways as well.
For sure.
In all of that.
Yeah,
I think
that's important.
Community in Vancouver is pretty tight and has like a pretty, I don't know, I think like a pretty good ways of communicating with each other and like, yeah, keeping in touch. All of that is really important.
Definitely. Yeah. And like, as you said too, just like even checking up on people's like mental well-being, that was a huge thing and still is a huge thing too. So checking up on your colleagues and your friends just to see like, how are you doing today? Like that can go a long way.
It really can. It really can. Mm-hmm. And I think like whatever, sex workers are typically quite isolated in the work that they do.
Yeah.
And the pandemic has been just magnifying that a lot. So whatever mutual aid is happening is wonderful and should only be supported to continue.
Absolutely.
We always need donations, not only of cash, but of like clothing, makeup, sex toys, whatever people want to get rid of, somebody will give a second life to, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
We also have a project starting that we are like kind of fundraising for, I guess, right now.
Okay.
Which is the creation of like a Black, Indigenous, person of color led sex work advisory committee that would advise PACE as an organization.
Ooh.
And take part in like research and stuff like that. And so we're trying to like counteract the like widespread employment discrimination that like shows up kind of differently in sex work, where it's like a lot of minorities, you don't see them in other positions, but they're overrepresented in sex work.
They are.
And trying to like correct that and make sure that we are, as an organization, acting with the best interests
in mind
of those community members at the heart of what we're doing going forward.
That's great.
And to sort of like advise us on how we can get rid of some barriers to justice.
Right. Wow. So many great things and so many ways that you as a listener can help. So I will be plugging in all the links down below. So if you haven't checked it out already, please give it a click. You know, be curious, help out wherever and whenever you can. So, but Kit, that brings me to the end of the episode. I'm so sad. It's already been an hour.
But like, yeah, I'm glad that you're keeping an eye on time because I probably just could have kept talking.
Oh,
so
me too.
I really appreciate it.
There were some episodes in the past I'm like, whoa, this is really, really going, you know, like a lot longer, which I don't contest. But I'm also like, I told you it was going to be an hour. And I'm like, oh, I always feel bad when it goes over. But
oh, it's all good. It's all good.
But I'll have to get you in for another episode for sure.
Yeah, anytime. Honestly, you're lovely. This has been really lovely and like probably one of the most delightful interviews I've ever done.
Oh, yay. Oh, great. I'm so glad to hear that. Yay. But
yeah, come back anytime.
Before I let you go, where can we find you or where can we find PACE?
You can find PACE at pace-society.org on the interwebs. And we're going to be updating our website very soon, which is great because it really needed an update. As well as we're on Twitter at Pace Society. Where else can people find us? I mean, people are welcome to come to our drop-in space once we're reopened, and we will definitely announce on our social media when we reopen our space. But we also have like a sort of like a drop-in window if folks just need harm reduction supplies. We're open Monday to Thursday, 10 to 4, sorry. So folks can come anytime and like pick up lube, condoms, or whatever else they might need.
Awesome. This was such a great conversation. I'm so happy to have connected with you and got you on the show. So thank you so much, Kit. It was a pleasure to speak with you today on the great work that you're doing for our community. So thank you, and thank you.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And the, I don't know, the like allocates are really nice. Thank you very much.
Yay! And it is Strip by Sia on Instagram or my personal, which is Sia Steph. And it's new episodes every single Sunday. Don't forget to like, rate, share, review, and subscribe. And we'll catch everyone in for another episode next week. Bye!
Bye.
You're listening to Strip by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia, artwork by Maria Bellandarama, music by Ted D, and photography by Ian Dabern.